Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Jessica Devereaux in Baltimore. Wall Street is celebrating this week after Argentina elected a new conservative president. Conservative opposition leader Mauricio Macri beat the ruling party candidate by a 51 to 48% margin. The change in government could end a decade-long battle between hedge funds and Argentina over huge debt payments. You may remember back in 2001, Argentina set a record by defaulting on $95 billion worth of loans. Their economy tanked, and Vulture capitalists like Paul Singer swooped in and purchased nearly worthless debt after the default. Then they waited while the debt gained value, and now they want full repayment. A plan this new administration is more amenable to than sitting President Cristina Fernández de Kirchner. She and her party have refused to pay the hedge funds for the past 12 years. Here to give us more context is our guest, James Henry. James is a leading economist, attorney, and investigative journalist who has written extensively about global issues. Thanks for joining us, James.
You're very welcome.
So, James, Paul Singer, who I mentioned in the intro, he wants Argentina to pay back at least $1.5 billion. Why shouldn't they pay back these hedge funds? I mean, a New York judge recently said they should. So do you agree?
No, I don't. I think, governments don't have a bankruptcy court, unlike the rest of us. And so when they get into deep debt problems, by virtue, in this case, of the previous neoliberal government in Argentina, under my classmate Domingo Cavallo, they ran up a huge foreign debt that they just could not service. And there was no place for Argentina to go other than to restructure that debt on its own. So they issued new bonds in 2004, and 98% of the bond owners, the creditors, that had bought Argentine debt before, accepted those bonds and the terms of the bonds. Paul Singer actually didn't buy the bonds that he owns in 2004, 2005. He waited till 2008 and purchased them for $48 million. And today he's claiming the face value of the bonds he bought back then at $1.5 billion. So, that's it's really a basic fault of the international system that we don't have a bankruptcy court for governments where they can work out reasonable payment terms and figure out how to restructure debts, because every government in the world, including our own, gets into debt problems. But Argentina has a history of indebtedness. In the 1970s, about half of the 2001 debt, $180 billion, came from the military junta during the 1970s. Nobody even knows where that money went, but about $88 billion was inherited by the succeeding democratic government. And it's outrageous to deny Argentina the right to restructure those odious debts. But in fact, one of the good things about the Kirchner government, I mean, you can criticize them for being, letting inflation getting out of control more recently, and corruption problems have emerged over a 12-year period. But one of the great legacies of that of this Kirchner government is that they reduced the debt to practically nothing. I mean, the current net public debt, after looking at reserves for Argentina, is less than $25 billion.
And how did they do that?
So I think the fact, what people are really worried about here, in fact, is that the Macri government might come in and do what previous neoliberal governments and the military junta did, which is to run up the debt as an alternative to raising taxes.
What is the new president proposing? How does he propose to handle the debt? And can you just speak briefly about how the Kirchner administration handled the debt?
Well, they engaged in this bond restructuring, and they stubbornly refused to negotiate with Singer because it would set a bad precedent. They were supported, by the way, with hedge funds all over the country that had basically supporting the Argentine position, as well as leading economists like Joe Stiglitz. I mean, I don't know of a single Western economist, or even at the IMF, who doesn't agree that the vulture capitalists need to be put out of their misery. But Macri has indicated that he's going to get this beyond this issue and basically settle with Singer, and so the discussions will probably lead to a payout for Singer, and he'll realize a huge return on this $48 million.
All right, let's turn the corner a bit, James, and let's talk about an alternative plan that would give everyday Argentines a more prosperous future. Considering, as you said before, massive inflation is happening in Argentina right now, declining cash reserves, and it's really a meager economic growth, mainly due, some say, to exclusion from the global markets post-default. Do you agree with that assessment? And what should be done to address the clear economic woes that the country currently faces?
Well, one of the opportunities for Argentina is that their own citizens have about $400 billion offshore of private wealth that they've kept outside of the country. So I would love to see a government that was able to attract that investment back to Argentina. I think there's tremendous growth potential there. They have enormous resources, including some of the largest untapped oil reserves in the south. This government has talked a good game, but I think in terms of mounting a concrete economic strategy to compete, they've lost a lot of opportunities, and they've been riding the backs of the commodity boom and the China growth spurt during the last decade. So, Argentina is a country with a very well-educated labor force. They have enormous natural resources. It's practically empty. Much of the country is, there's enormous agricultural potential there. But they have they've had a consistent, the whole century of sort of bad governance. The Kirchner government, I think, was actually relatively adept at solving certain problems, like I mentioned, the debt. But on the tax front, one clear thing that they need to do is a tax reform, not only reducing payroll taxes, which are exorbitant, but to have taxes actually a fair tax system that takes advantage of all this wealth that many wealthy Argentines have offshore. I would say focusing on the tax system would be one of the first priorities.
Okay, James Henry, thank you so very much for joining us.
Quite welcome.
And thank you for joining us on the Real News Network.